today Ms. Jody Russell. She is the business coalition representative of the Business Coalition for a Global Plastics Treaty, Nestle. She has joined us online. Thank you, Jody. And I'm really sorry for the technical glitches that you had to face initially. Thank you for joining us. Then we have been joined by Ms. Bontu Yusuf. She is representing the Global Plastic Action Partnership by World Economic Forum. Bontu, thank you so much for joining us online here for the session. In-person speakers that have joined us today we are really delighted to have Mr. Sheikh Waqar Ahmed, who's the CEO of Core Alliance. We have been joined by Mr. Babar Aziz Bhatti. He is the CEO of Green Earth Recycling. Then we have also been joined by Mr. Dr. Basat Yamin from LUMS. Thank you, sir, for joining us here all the way from Lahore, and Babar Sahab also, you too. And we have also been joined by Mr. Faraz Ahmed, who is representing Living Indus Initiative. We were supposed to be joined by Mr. Hamad Shamimi, who is the Additional Secretary of Ministry of Climate Change. But at this very hour, he's briefing the Prime Minister on the same issue. So probably the recommendations that we are gathering today, they will be very helpful in shaping the narrative that Pakistan will be taking at the International Negotiations Committee session, INC 5, that is being held at the, I think it's happening in South Korea this year, and it will be during the last week of November. So without further ado, I'll briefly introduce the topic because I want my panelists to be more open, vocal, and I make sure that they engage in a debate that's very constructive for all the sectors here. And then I hope if time allows, we'd be happy to take questions from the participants here as well. So thank you so much. As we all understand the fact that plastics is a global problem, but we also need to see that this is a problem that cannot be eliminated. This is something that's here to stay with us, but we need to adopt to manage the plastics in a way that they don't create environmental issues. And the existing issues that we have in the environment, how the industry can support us, how the government can support us, the private sector can support us in managing those challenges around the plastics. Also, earlier, the United Nations Assembly, UNIA 5.2, adopted a historic resolution to develop an internationally legally binding instrument on plastic pollution, including in the marine environment, at a meeting in Nairobi, Kenya, that I was just linking with, because now that followed by, as a follow-up to the UNIA 5 session, they will be adopting a legally binding instrument in INC 5. So over the past few years, officials have been working through the intricate details of the treaty with the aim of finalizing it legally. However, additional efforts are likely to be required before the treaty text is finalized and open for ratification at a diplomatic conference. And this is that crucial hour when we are going to be proposing and giving suggestions on how Pakistan should be moving forward with this legally binding document, and how, what should be the case of Pakistan, and also how global implications can affect the industry when that document is adopted. So without further ado, I'd start with our first panelist, so Sheikh Waqar Sahab, and I have introduced him, but in his introduction, I think he's somebody who is taken a lead in context of bringing all the packaging sector under Core Alliance, and this is a great effort for the Pakistan, for the entire country, because plastics issue, the way Core is handling, it's amazing. So thank you, sir, for that. Just to, I hope online participants can hear us. I hope IT team, there's no problem with that. Okay. So Waqar sir, my question from you is, because I've just mentioned Core, what is the Core Alliance? And what work has it been doing in terms of advocacy for policies pertaining to the promotion of plastic circularity and plastics waste management?
Thank you very much, Zainab. Thank you very much, SDPI, for organizing this whole event. I think it's a great initiative. It's provide opportunity to not only the private sector, but I've seen a lot of non-profits are here who are presenting themselves in this area. So when it comes to Core Alliance, this is the first packaging alliance in Pakistan, and it's not only by name. It looks like it's only packaging, but it's actually The larger FMCG sector is part of it. Then we have packaging companies who are producing these packaging materials. The third bigger component is the recyclers who are part of it today. And then the last and the final one is the bigger non-profits and institutions like SDPI, WWF, UNDP. So we started very small, some 4 and 5 years back. It was pre-COVID that we were only 4 or 5 companies. Today, the membership has expanded to 26, and this including very diverse membership where a company like Jazz, Total Parco, other than known FMCG companies like Pepsi, Nestle, Coca-Cola, Unilever, and many more, they are part of it. And the purpose is to bring all the mindsets, all the views that we have on plastic on the table, and then have a constructive discussion. And that discussion is to help policymakers to come up with the right kind of legislation, right kind of policies in the country, and we are promoting policies which are accepted worldwide. So we don't want to say, and we know none of us in that core is saying that something needs to be done uniquely in Pakistan. So if there's a best practice adopted by anywhere in Europe or anywhere in US or other developed countries or the developing countries also in our neighborhood, whether it's Far East or whether it's within our South Asia, so that need to be captured, and that need to be practiced in Pakistan as well. And that's only possible when all diverse mindsets, multi-stakeholders, they are working together. So we also work very closely with the Ministry of Climate Change, and we do very close discussion with all the environment protection agencies in Pakistan. As you know, the environment is a provincial subject. So where MOCC is more focused on ICT and working on the climate change agenda or bigger treaties, but actual implementations are done by the EPAs. So we work very closely with them so that right kind of policies and regulation comes in. Sometimes it's become challenge for us because government try to do things which are a little fast pace, I would say. So we suggest them that there's always good to adopt policies which are easy to manage, and in a way that you need to take baby steps sometimes, because there's a learning curve also, learning phase also. So we cannot do today what Europe has done in the last 10 years. So we can't do in one step. So we have to go faster, because there is no need to reinvent the wheel, but there's a need to take steps in which our industry is capable of doing it, because this industry is not only the larger multinational, but also there's a lot of local industry. So you can't create an environment which is not conducive to them. But at the same time, they have to be environment friendly. We have to ensure that all our practices internally and externally as private sector, we play responsibly. So this is the role of code, that we provide a platform where this kind of discussion happens, and then we help government to take the right decision.
Thank you, Vakar, for explaining about this alliance and the initiatives that this alliance is taking. So I'll also take the leverage of having with us the international participants, speakers, especially Jody and Bontu. But before I ask Bontu's perspective, I would really want our other speakers, local speakers, to also share their perspective. But I'll start with Jody, and then I'll move towards other panelists here, and then I'll request Bontu for her perspective, because GPAP is something around which Pakistan is now developing financing mechanism, and so we'd be very happy to understand how GPAP can support the private sector, and also what will be the stance in context of the INC file. So Jody, my question from you is, what is the Business Coalition for a Global Plastics Treaty, and what has it been doing to advocate for a treaty that's practical and yet ambitious?
Thanks very much for the question and the kind invitation to join you today remotely.
Jody, we can't hear you. Glitches.
It looks like she was dropped off of the call. Can you guys hear me?
IT team, can you please reconnect with her? Jody, are you? I think she has dropped from the call. The team is checking with her. In the meanwhile, I'll move towards other panelists here. So especially before coming towards the core industrial representatives who are working in the field, Dr. Basit, representing academia here. So my question from you is around academia is producing a lot of research at the moment, but that research is somehow now not being linked with the industry. Industry has its own challenges, and the stance from the industry is that the research that academia is doing, they're not doing it on actual, the groundwork that's actually happening, the challenges that industry is facing. Is that the case? Do you think academia's research is supportive of the industry at the moment? And if not, correct me if I'm wrong, what could be done about it?
Do you want me to be really honest on that? Yeah. So thank you very much for the opportunity. That's actually correct. Yeah, it's not that. So academia, when you look at the academic institutions, they have their own mandates. So the faculty colleagues working at the academic institutions, they sort of like have their own research projects on which they get fundings. And those research projects, I mean, the problem that we're facing with the plastic pollution, it doesn't really give you the deep questions that an intellectual sitting at a university would want to sort of like sit down and work on. It's more of a management related challenges, plastic sort of like pollution that we are facing. It's mainly because of the management related issues. So that's partly correct, yeah. So academic institutions are not actually doing the research which directly would benefit industry, particularly in this domain. And that is primarily because of the reason that it doesn't give you those deep intellectual questions to work on that an academic would want to work on. But I mean, if you want, you can steer. You can actually get them involved. If you present them with a problem, they would want to sort of like, of course, help you with the solution as well. Those solutions might not get published in international journals where the academics would want to publish, but that would certainly help solving the challenge locally that we are facing. But what people sitting in the academic institutions can do is to help understand the problem. And that is very important, because while we are making policies, it's important to understand the nature of the problem as well. So there are, let's say, several different types of plastics that sort of like constitute different products. And when we talk about when we're developing a policy, and there's several different applications. And when we say that we are developing a policy, we do not really take that into account. We simply just say that it's a plastic. There are, let's say, I mean, I don't know, there are 5 different plastics which constitutes, let's say, 80% of the total plastic that people normally use. And they are all different. And sometimes you put them together to create a product. And that creates a problem when you develop a regulation to sort of like do something about plastics. People do not take that into account. That is so diverse that sometimes one single sort of like solution might not work for all the different types of plastics. One simple example, if you want me to go more technical, because I have the technical sort of like that's sort of like who I am. So there are certain properties that you cannot achieve with the single layers. You have to go into the multi-layers, and there is no technology available internationally or locally, globally. I mean, people do not have an alternative to that. And if you put a sort of like outright ban on such a sort of like, let's say, packaging, you would see that a lot of convenience that we are enjoying right now will sort of like will be taken away. So just to sort of like mention that that we need to have a technical understanding of the issue that we are facing, and then develop a solution or a policy or a regulation around it. Yeah, so academic institutions, yeah, of course, they are there to help to create that intellectual sort of like insight into these problems. They might not be sort of like doing direct research, which is of direct relevance, but the knowledge is there to tap into.
Thank you, Dr. Basit, and thank you for endorsing it that there is a gap between the industry and academia. And I hope through these kind of forums that CORE is supporting as of now, the purpose is that we need to work together, academia, industry, and the government, plus the development partners. It's a, we have to formulate another new coalition so we can manage this entire plastics problem, not just in Pakistan, but globally as well. And so, Jody, I'm getting back to you with my question. So the question is, again, I'll repeat, what is the Business Coalition for a Global Plastics Treaty, and what has it been doing to advocate for a treaty that's practical yet ambitious? Over to you, please.
Thanks very much. And hopefully the IT will stay with us. So I have the pleasure to join you as a co-chair of the policy working group for the Business Coalition. This is a group today of over 300 organizations and businesses globally, from finance, brands and retailers, packaging converters and packaging producers, as well as waste management companies, supporting business associations, as well as other companies who are providing software services and facilitation services. We started off with a vision to support the reduction of plastic production and use through a circular economy approach, the circulation of plastic items that cannot be eliminated, and prevention and remediation of hard to eliminate microplastic and macroplastic leakage into the environment. So tackling all the different dimensions of the challenge of plastic pollution. And the companies who are in this coalition have joined largely in the beginning because they were already working with either the WWF or the Ellen MacArthur Foundation on the circular economy. And many companies, such as our company, Nestle, had already made commitments to reduce our use of virgin plastic, to support getting to 100% recyclable or reusable packaging, to integrate recycled content where possible. And so as many of the companies have been working on these commitments, we actually realized this is challenging because we don't have economies of scale and necessarily the regulatory framework in every country in the world supporting making these transitions to other materials or to simply reduce our use of plastic so that the burden on waste management systems isn't as great. And so when we started off with the Business Coalition, we had 4 major objectives, which were to develop policy recommendations, supporting the treaty process from an ambitious business perspective, coordinating business advocacy so that ambitious businesses, NGOs, and financial institutions could have a unified voice, and build confidence in the business community that this could be actually a meaningful tool to help us harmonize regulation, so that when we trade across national borders or when we import materials into our markets, we can actually be driving economies of scale and materials that are more sustainable and ultimately can be recycled locally. And so in the end, we convened quite a diverse group of companies to do this work moving forward.
Thank you, Jody, and thank you for highlighting. Of course, there are challenges for the industry, but the industry is also trying really hard to get over it. But of course, industry has its own stance, and different development partners have their own stance. But there's one thing around which we are all aligned, and that's that. Of course, it's a challenge, and we all need to struggle together to overcome the challenge. And of course, it's because we are all working on leave no one behind agenda. So the purpose is not to harm any sector's interests, and that shouldn't be harmed no matter what, because we are all here, we are all contributing. MNCs are contributing towards revenue generation in different regions. So of course, they have a very important role, and that's why thank you, Jody, for that contribution. I'll be coming back to you with another question. But for now, my next question is from you, Babar Saab. So because you're working as a recycling company, you're also a member of the Core Alliance. What are the key challenges that you see when it comes to plastics recycling, especially you're working in a developing country, Pakistan? What are the key challenges? But also, I would like you to address the key opportunities that this industry can utilize within Pakistan. Over to you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, so I think coming from a recycling background, I think the biggest problem, even as a recycler, that I could probably put my finger on is bad waste management practices. Now, plastic is very easily recycled, especially in a country like Pakistan. We were talking about opportunities. Pakistan has the opportunity of having this huge workforce of informal labor that is capable of working and providing us with this service of collecting materials so that it can be recycled. But unfortunately, that's still a very small amount, and there are problems associated with that labor force. Two that pop up in my head are one, bad conditions. They're like digging through garbage which might have infectious materials in it. People at home also will put on certain they'll use some medical equipment. Even though hospitals, we will take that equipment and we will incinerate it, but that does not happen in the private sector, in the household waste. So I think that's something that is a problem, as well as an opportunity for us, and as well as child labor and all those kind of issues that kind of come into this. So I think the most important thing that we have to do is we have to figure out, we have to first learn that unless we collect the material in an appropriate and a proper way, there's absolutely no way that it's going to be recycled. Bad waste management practices will make sure that the material that is recycled will result in a material which is half the quality of any other recycled material that would otherwise be collected, if they were collected in a proper way, right? And on top of that, it'll cost you twice the amount to recycle that, because you have to remove all this kind of cross contamination, and especially in Pakistan, when I look at compactors, I know that in the West we were looking at how to copy models from raw Pakistan. Unfortunately, has copied the Western model, and I feel that's a mistake on our part. Compactors are something that are completely anti-recycling. As soon as you throw something into a compactor, you're immediately cross-contaminating the organics and the inorganics, and after that you can just burn it, and even that burning is not going to give you half the result, because the organics are going to have so much moisture in it that it's going to be even counterproductive to burn something like that. So I think one thing that we have to learn, I know that we're discussing plastic, and I'm taking this conversation on to waste management, but I think it's very important to understand that waste management is where it all starts. If you don't do that correctly, there's absolutely no way that you're going to be able to recycle. Coming back to the opportunities, we have this opportunity in Pakistan that, again, being a developing country, there's this huge demand for recycled materials, because we're a cost conscious country. We want recycled materials because they're cheaper, right? I can't say that for the West, but in Pakistan, I think as much as material that we can properly manage and collect, I think all of it will be recycled in Pakistan. We do have the infrastructure, informal or formal, that's another debate. But if you collect any material properly, any material, and I'm not saying if it's PET, it will be recycled. But the problem is that there's certain materials which are very hard to collect, and our waste management practices are anyway so inferior. And I keep telling people that, unfortunately, apart from the informal sector that works in Pakistan, we're literally working on a waste transportation model, not a waste management model. We don't manage anything. The people that are hanging at the back of the trucks, they manage whatever they can, given the time and the ability that they have. But no one else is managing anything. There's everything just goes directly to a landfill site. And there's one thing I want to say as well, just as far as the government is concerned. I think the government also needs to promote private sector companies to come in. I feel like the government completely subsidizes, the waste management system, and that completely blocks out everyone from coming in. How can anyone compete with the government who's giving you free service, even if it's not as good as the service that you're giving? There's nothing better than free, especially in a place like Pakistan. People don't want to pay a rupee, even if it's better service, as long as they're getting it for free. Absolutely. I think government needs to work on that part.
Thank you, Babar. And because SDPI is a think tank, and we have to take a neutral stance, whether it's for the government, for the private sector, for everyone. So government says waste belongs to government, and that's where the challenge arises. If it belongs to government, it needs to be managed, and that's a very important point you have raised here. We are not managing it. So before we have Living in this initiative team being represented by Faraz here. We also have another member of Living in this in the room. I can see him, Dr. Adil Nazam. Thank you for joining us here. I'll coming back to you, Faraz, but before you, we have Bontu Yusuf and Bontu. So before I ask you a question, just to let the participants know that around National Plastic Action Partnership, Pakistan is working to develop the financing mechanism. That partnership is very much in Pakistan. We have signed GPAP and we are working around it. So we are working on the financing mechanism now, and private sector stakes are extremely important when we are talking about it. So Bontu, as Global Plastic Action Partnership continues to drive global action on plastic pollution, how do you see its role evolving in supporting countries, particularly developing countries like Pakistan, in aligning with the International Plastics Treaty? Over to you, please.
Thank you, Zainab. Just wanted to check. Can you all hear me?
Just a minute. We can't hear you. IT team, you're requested to raise the volume of the speaker so we can hear Bontu, please.
Okay, thank you.
Bontu?
Hello, testing. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this panel. I'm quite excited to hear all these local activities and perspectives. As you mentioned, I'm with the Global Plastic Action Partnership based here in Geneva at the World Economic Forum. And we've been hosting Pakistan as one of our key national partnerships since 2022. We've had a lot of learnings through our landscape analysis, through, as Zainab mentioned, a financing roadmap, which has just been drafted at this moment in partnership with the Ministry of Climate Change and Environment. In terms of how we view activities going forward, particularly in Pakistan, we're really honed in on translating commitments into tangible action. And one of our key value propositions and our key strengths in our national partnerships is that we really encourage local ownership and impact. As one of the panelists mentioned, it's important to have localized solutions rather than bringing in ideas and policies that have worked quite well in the West. We really honor having national perspectives be core. And also generating evidence-based insights and knowledge products such as the financing roadmap. We've also taken a look at the societal impacts of plastic pollution and the different communities that are the most impacted and are also acting as agents of change, which would include informal workers and waste pickers. So that's another really important part of our work here. And lastly, we prioritize inclusive and holistic approaches to tackling plastic pollution. Ultimately, this is an issue that is societal. There are humans behind these metrics that we have and that we see. And so it's really important to understand all the different factors, and not just financing, innovation, policy, but truly understand the communities and the societies and people that will be championing these activities going forward to ensure that it is something that is ingrained and sustainable for the long term. In the light of the plastic treaty, this next year, a lot of the activities at the global scale and national scale will be focused on implementation, just regardless of the outcome of the treaty negotiations coming up soon. So it's quite a timely time for the Global Plastic Action Partnership especially in our national partnerships, where we're really driving action. At this moment, we have 19 national partnerships, and it's our goal to have 25 by next year. And one of the advantages that we have right now is that there's a local community that's already been catalyzed, particularly in Pakistan, and we're ready to get started with strategic interventions that have been outlined in the roadmap. So this is quite an exciting time for our Pakistan NPAP. We have 2 different knowledge products that are soon to be launched, and task forces that have been convened and will need to be reconvened in order to establish a coordinated action towards plastic pollution. That's something that we find incredibly, incredibly important, and that's hones to our core strength at the forum, is really emphasizing multi-stakeholder action. That's what we've seen in our other national partnerships, and something that has supported us in driving more finances towards activities. Once we're able to prove having all these different actors and decision makers having consensus in terms of what is the best next step to take in their respective country, and showing outputs, strong outputs, insights, generating community activities, etc., that has really supported us in driving additional financing towards specific projects. For example, in our Ghana NPAP, we've been able to raise $500,000 just on our specific task force initiatives. And I think this is something that's quite promising, and we're really looking forward to see what the Pakistan NPAP is able to achieve in the next year.
Thank you very much, Montu, for explaining the GPAP's global influence in developing countries. And also, we do look forward that something really incredible gets out of it in Pakistan as well, because this is something, especially over the last 2 years, the mobilization around or the momentum around plastics is it's gaining more momentum. The debate is being generated now. It's consumers are being made aware that this is a challenge. But everyone, and that I can assure you that all of us sitting not just in this room, but also the diverse stakeholders, they're all willing to work on tackling this challenge. I'll be coming back to you with another question, but thank you for your response. Faraz, my next question from you is, you're representing Living Indus Initiative, and we know that this is a initiative that's a joint initiative by United Nations System, Ministry of Climate Change, and it was also given a restoration of the key restoration flagship projects awarded by United Nations Environment Program during the UNEA. So we also know the fact that zero plastic waste is also one of the key priority interventions that has been endorsed by the government of Pakistan, that we are aligned on settling up model cities around zero plastic waste. And this was also endorsed by Pakistani representatives. I believe Ambassador Munir Saab also endorsed it. So what is your stake around the global, this challenge of plastics, and also the contributions by Living Indus Initiative? And you see how private sector can align its objectives of managing plastics with those of the Living Indus. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Zanab. And I'm really honored to have Dr. Adil Najam here in the room, because he was the man behind all the strategy and initial formulation of the Living Indus. Living Indus, a very quick background that in terms of a response to triple planetary crisis, United Nations actually works in a 5-year roadmap and has 5 different outcome areas. Outcome 3 is climate action, and outcome 3 actually culminates into a strategic umbrella initiative that we term as Living Indus. So essentially, any particular initiative, any particular work that can actually fill in the complete picture, because that's something that we really that is really important to understand, that it is not possible by any single government organization or any particular entity by the private sector to take up the challenge that we are currently facing. So Living Indus was suggested as the umbrella strategy, identifying 25 interventions. And out of these 25 interventions, as you have rightly mentioned, zero plastic waste is one of the main intervention. One additional element that I would like to add, that leaving no one behind, as you have earlier suggested, is one of the key area or the key principle that UN actually tries to work to. So essentially, we need to take the whole ecosystem into picture, so everyone can actually pitch in into formulating the bigger picture. Now, coming to the plastics, there are 2 areas that we normally intermix. There is specifically waste management, and that waste management realm has a very specific realm of plastic. So Living Indus, first of all, has initiated various initiatives for integrated solid waste management, because what we understand is that from the collectors to the people who are manufacturing or the recyclers, there is a big gap in between, and that big gap can only be covered through private sector ownership, through SMEs, once they actually try to fill in the whole picture, as I have already mentioned. So for that integrated solid waste management, we have certain initiatives that are currently being executed in areas of Punjab and Sindh, and they are being through various different donors. We are actually trying to come up with the policy frameworks, so those policy frameworks can actually help in filling up that particular gap, so everyone people sitting in the room would have very specific roles as compared to what necessarily needs to be done. So that particular gap can be filled up. And that integrated solid waste management strategy for specifically Sahiwal in Punjab, and there are areas in Sindh that we are actually taking up, and hopefully that would provide that necessary framework that can be further replicated throughout Pakistan. So that policy framework, along with, obviously there are pilots that are being done under that particular initiative, that hopefully would solve at least one part of the problem, if not the problem as a whole. Because we all know numbers, we all know data that the plastics in itself has a huge problem. But I think that that particular missing cog in the overall machinery needs to be there, which necessarily would solve the problem at a larger picture. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Faraz, for mentioning the initiatives under which Living Indus, is working, and private sector engagement is a key to make it successful and sustainable in Pakistan. We have the private sector here. I'm sure many of us will be reaching out to you for the projects, for the SMEs integration within managing plastics, and definitely everyone needs to be on deck for tackling the challenge. My next question is going to be from Jody. So I'll be coming back to you directly with a very direct question, because this is something that we also require your inputs for the policy recommendations. What is being done to address the concerns of the private sector in the progress we have made so far on the treaty? Over to you.
If I can ask for a clarification, which concerns are you referring to? Because the private sector is such a broad space.
So basically, we do understand the fact that there's going to be a legally binding document that will be adopted in INC 5. So do you think the interests of private sector in context of, because private packaging industry we are producing plastics, right? So do you think their interests will be addressed in that treaty? If there's any concerns from the packaging industry that you think is already part of the treaty, or you think should be part of the treaty?
Let me give some framing then, since I'm doing this without slides, to give the audience who's with you in the room a bit of context. At the INC 5, the fifth negotiation round, there will not be a treaty text adopted. That will take place at a diplomatic conference, potentially in 2025. What will take place at the INC 5 is a discussion around the new third non-paper proposed by the chair, because the first 4 treaty rounds of negotiations resulted in lack of clarity on if the existing rules of procedure from prior multilateral agreements would be carried over, and quite practically had taken what was an initial draft of the treaty prepared by the Secretariat based on other treaties, blown it up to 77 pages, and included 3,500 sets of brackets. And every set of bracket is a point where one government disagreed with the content. So that would take several years to resolve the 3,500 brackets. So the chair, a very hardworking career diplomat from Ecuador, Ambassador Luis Vallas, we're quite fortunate to have someone working so hard on behalf of solving the problem of plastic pollution, and also the problem of the negotiation process. And how do you bring together 192 countries who have very different interests, very different economies, and different levels of maturity in the waste management system? Some do a great job collecting and landfilling or incinerating, so no one sees the waste and no one thinks that the lack of a circular economy is a problem. Other countries, as the other speaker alluded to, struggle with collection. And there's a real debate about where the responsibility lies and what should be a government service versus a private service, how such contracts should be allocated. But in the end, most people want the same thing. They want a clean environment. They want clean water. They don't want the wastewater pipes in their neighborhood to get drained if there's a flood, to get clogged if there's a flood, resulting in disease and pollution. They don't want plastic in their agricultural crops and microplastics degrading in the soils. As humanity, we actually have a lot of the same interests. So if I speak to the interests that are being represented, I'll say first, every industry present, because there are many industries. Packaging gets a lot of attention because we represent 40% of the production of plastics usage every year. But there's also the fisheries industry, which is responsible for a large amount of the plastic that's found in the oceans today. The automotive industry, the textile industry has shifted to become 90% synthetic fibers in the past 20 years. And many of those manufacturing companies are in Asia. So there are very diversified economic interests present in the treaty, and it's difficult to generalize. The Business Coalition has brought together a large group of companies that are working, let's say, from a proactive perspective on a circular economy approach and reducing the production of plastic to the point that we have sustainable levels of production and consumption. So if we don't get a treaty, which is going to be the question, how successful will the INC 5 be? Will enough governments, there are about 140 governments who have a high level of agreement, and then there's a smaller group of about 20 governments that have different views because their economy is structured differently. And the percentage of exports dependent on plastic products in some economies has grown, whereas in others it's shrunken. So this is a very challenging dynamic because every country has its own political, geopolitical mix of industry interest to balance. But we know if we don't get a strong treaty, or if we get a weak treaty, we're going to have continued increases in greenhouse gas emissions, and clearly the 1.5 degree target will be missed. The plastics industry today is on track for 4 to 4.5 degrees Celsius warming on average. That's not good for anyone. We know that we've already exceeded the chemical boundaries for planetary pollution. We know there are impacts on human and animal health from plastic pollution, and that biodiversity in the oceans and freshwater ecosystems has been damaged already by plastic. We also have a risk to soil health and agricultural yields as a result of microplastics leaking into the environment. And without a treaty, companies who are active, regardless of where you are in the value chain, will not get harmonized regulation. So some level of harmonized regulation is going to be a boon because it will drive economies of scale, it will facilitate commerce, and it sends a clear signal for materials that are recyclable or materials that will never be recycled in a particular economy. And it enables the government to start to make choices about what are the materials that they want to pay to manage in their economy or allow in their economy, and what are the materials that they've decided actually have no place because they don't want to make the investments. But there are really tough decisions that need to be made at some point if we're going to manage the pollution issue. And in the end, I'll say proactive companies, like the company I'm fortunate to work for, we've done a lot on a voluntary basis. We supported design rules for packaging. We've changed materials that we used. We've eliminated certain additives to ensure that the materials that our packaging uses have value for recyclers. And if we don't get a treaty, all these companies who are trying will remain in limbo with voluntary commitments, fragmented policy development, high compliance costs, limited economies of scale, not to mention the question of the just transition and how do we move workers who are effectively scavenging or picking waste today into more formalized roles with better health and safety and working conditions so that they're not left behind by a transition. There are a lot of challenges that we have to address.
Thank you, Jody. And yes, there are lots of challenges that needs to be addressed, but one thing around which everybody is aligned that, as you pointed this out, we need a clean environment, no matter what, and it's our fundamental right. So thank you for your intervention. Waqar, my next question is from you. I know that's a complicated question, but of course we need your input. You're representing CORE here. So Pakistan has a complex regulatory framework for environment, including on plastics. How does it affect businesses, and what can be done to ensure that global plastics treaty does not disrupt business activities? Plus, and I quote here, the businesses also get aligned on how we need to clean the environment. Over to you.
Very much once again. I think there's no second opinion that businesses have to be aligned, that they have to be part of this, and they have to find solutions. At the same time, I think responsible governments are also need to look into it globally. And of course, when it comes back to Pakistan, that was your original question. The challenge here is, the complex regulatory environment brings more challenges for the private sector and the industry. And post-devolution, as we all know, environment is a provincial subject. We do not want that every EPA is coming up with its own regulation. Because then we don't have any boundaries, physical boundaries. between Punjab, Sindh, KP, and Balochistan. So a lot of these packaging materials and packaged product, they moved across provinces. It will be a big hassle if Sindh comes up with a law which says tomorrow PET is not good, and Punjab says PET is good, but Dr. Saab talked about the multi-layer packaging. Multi-layer packaging is bad, and then the KP say both are good, but another form of packaging, another type of packaging is not good. So we need to talk to each other, and we have gone through a very tough exercise when it comes to harmonization of food standards in Pakistan post-devolution. It took us 5 years, and I always say that it was 3 governments that have crossed before we got this final conclusion, where all provinces got together. They agreed that there's going to be, yes, there can be different laws, but all have to align under one umbrella of PSQCA, under Ministry of Science and Technology. So they can have a different regulation, but they have to align and make sure industry has to follow one rule. Rather, there are 10 kind of different regulation. And same is true for environmental law, and especially when it comes to packaging laws, because a different probably you can say emission control can be done on a site. But once there's a different packaging law, it's produced from a factory in Punjab, it goes to Sindh, or from something produced there, it comes here. A different law, which is a more stringent law in Sindh, make industry there uncompetitive. A more stringent law in Punjab make it more uncompetitive, in comparison to KP or other way. So that's why you need harmonization. So that's why complexity is, we have to avoid those complexity. We know the government of Pakistan and, especially Board of Investment has an initiative which is called Ease of Doing Business. And this is part of the ease of doing business, so that we have more harmonized structures, harmonized regulation, so that businesses can grow, and businesses have to be part of the solution. So at the same time, I think any regulation which comes, even a kind of stringent regulation comes, but it's across Pakistan, and its implementation is done all across Pakistan, that is easier than to fight with 5 different kind of regulations, because we have the same team. For example, most of the companies that work with Core, we don't have 5 different teams for working for each province. It's the same team. So we have to focus more, and then we can contribute better, and then we put all our energies in contributing back to, in terms of more responsible attitude from the companies also. That I would say. So harmonization is very, very crucial to avoid complexity of regulations.
Thank you, Waqar. And policy consistency.
That's another area.
Yeah, that's
Abrupt
another
changes
area.
are not good anyway. So, and
Yeah.
I think the biggest example is climate change itself.
Exactly.
The climate change is all about abrupt changes. We don't know how weather is going to react tomorrow or day after. So if that is not good for the whole planet, how abrupt changes of policies can be good for the businesses?
Of course. We don't need abrupt policies. Rather, we need to first do our own homework. And why I'm saying this, because, so Dr. Basit, my next question is from you. There's a lot of discrepancies when it comes to data on plastics. Government quotes another figure that industry is not aligned to, they don't agree with those figures. Recyclers have their own figures. Plastic producer companies have their own figures. So there's no harmonization when it comes to quoting. It's very easy to say we have a problem of plastics equivalent to the height of 2 K2 mountains, but that's not the case, and you know that. So how can academia, address these challenges around data? Data is extremely important, because we also need to align ourselves on the fact that we are also importing plastics. It's not just that we are producing plastics. Our trade policies also have an impact on how much plastics is coming into the country. So how can academia address this challenge around the data that we have? Over to you.
So data is the key. No, I mean, if you are putting together policy and developing sort of like whatever regional or global level intervention, you need to know the true scale of the issue that you're dealing with. Unfortunately, in our case, if we talk more specifically about the plastics, because there is a lot of informal sector, because there is a sort of like huge percentage of informal sector that works in, particularly in the recycling part of the business. so data, we do not really have the true picture in the data sense. We don't have true picture of what we are dealing with. Not just the numbers. I mean, as I said in the beginning, it's not just about numbers. You also need to know the exact nature of the challenge. I mean, there are so many different types of materials that you sort of like tag as plastics. It's not just. I mean, I was looking at some data online on a pretty credible source, and they would say like there are 50 million tons of let's say solid waste that Pakistan is producing, for example. And then the same website would quote that India is producing, let's say, 63 million tons. And I said, how come? I mean, Pakistan is a relatively small country compared to, I mean, the population wise as well. So how come that data can be relied on? So we are actually dealing a problem without knowing the magnitude of the problem and also the nature of the problem. It's extremely critical to know both things, the magnitude and also the nature of the problem. We do not know either of them. And of course, academic institutions, I mean, they are happy to help, but you're also responding to your first question as well. Some incentive has to be created for the academic institutions to become part of this whole problem solving issue that we are dealing with. So yeah, academic institutions can certainly help. They have the capacity, they do have the human resource as well, they do have the intellectual capacity as well, infrastructure as well available. But we somehow need to sort of like incentivize and get them involved. Yeah.
With your permission, I just want to respond to this. So at the moment, I think very rightly said, there is no one national study available which can talk about what kind of plastic and how much plastic is coming to Pakistan, how much is produced, where it is going, in which sector, where it's consumed, and how those been collected and recycled. We don't have this kind of data. So people have their own assumptions, and everyone trying to, touch this, one part of the elephant, and then, this looks like, it looks like this. So for this, understanding this challenge, and because it comes back to us, to most of the companies, that how much we are producing. So we're trying to do a national study also on this area, and we are trying to come up before the, I think, end of next year or mid of next year sometime, when we have a proper study done in Pakistan, which can at least give us some idea what is happening on plastics, so that it can provide us some guidance. And on the last numbers that you have there, the mountains part, interestingly, when we dig down to, when it's been reflected by, presented by, at the highest level by government of Pakistan. In fact, every one of us was using the same, pictures in our presentation internally and externally, but someone challenged it. And then we started digging out, and it came out to be a multilateral in Pakistan who first came up with that presentation, then used by Ministry of Climate Change and international forums. It was actually based on a newspaper clipping. There was no research study done. That's how data is dealt in Pakistan. So there was no resource. So that's why I think it's very important to have this kind of study done.
Thank you. And from leveraging this forum, I think for for everyone who's listening online in person, 2K2 mountains should never be quoted when we're talking about plastics problem. Those figures are not correct. And also, I'm an environmentalist here. I can assure you, because I've worked with Living Indus Initiative on the plastic scoping study, that's not the case. There's some data that Living Indus Initiative is also producing. So before I move towards Bontu, just one question from Babar. Around data, again, globally, I believe some 9% plastics is being recycled. And when we are talking about Pakistan, I think somebody quoted yesterday, it's hardly 3 to 4%. I want to take your response on that, if that's the case. Also, especially after Afghans immigrants policy, recyclers have been impacted. Because informal sector mostly comprised of the Afghanis, so recyclers were impacted. How is the situation here now in Pakistan for the recyclers?
Okay. Yeah, I think this 3 to 4% sounds like one of those newspaper clipping stories, which is now moving forward. No, I think Pakistan is fortunately enough to be in one of those places where it is like I was mentioning before, most of the plastic that is properly collected over here is recycled. We only have few problems over here. One is, single use minus PET bottle, right? Forks, knives, sachets, cigarette butts, these small items that kind of, spill through the cracks when it comes to, your, basic collection infrastructure. Afghanis and all, for sure, I think that has affected, like business overall. But I think it kind of happened, side by side with the economy kind of going down as well. So I think the demand on them also kind of reduced. So I don't think we're feeling it as much as we would have otherwise had the economy been booming and the Afghanis would have been leaving. But I feel like, this whole data thing and, this Afghani things, for me, it's like a non-issue. First of all, like I'm not saying that data is not important. Data is just a macro issue. Right? It's not a micro issue. I work on more micro issues on the ground, how to fix problems, how to, take waste out. I don't care if it's 20 billion or 2 million. I think even 2 million is going to be a tough nut to crack, when it comes to a single small company. So I think from that point of view, I can't really comment on the data. And as far as the Afghanis and all that is concerned, I think anyways, for, like I've been working with the MNCs for the past, like almost a decade now, and I know that there is at the back of their head another requirement of theirs as well, that, there should be no child labor, there should be no bad working conditions, there should be tick. It's just taken a back seat because of the scale of the plastic problem. People are willing to kind of like, kick that can down the road and say that, okay, we'll come to that at a later stage. But I think it's important to work on it now. Nothing happens overnight. Yes, they're playing their role, but I think we need to come in and we need to give us, a substitute arrangement for that as well. We're not giving anything. Like there's absolutely no other solution that we have. Like we've had to go, being a recycler, we've had to integrate vertically all the way down to waste management, just because I was mentioning before that the waste management, the way that it's done over here, it cannot supply us with the raw material that we require. Right? So we've had to do that ourselves. It's not impossible. It's very possible. We're already working with 1,500 houses in one society, and we are taking all of that waste, 100% of their waste, and we are dismantling that within our factory premises, and nothing is going to landfills. Yes, 1,500 houses is nothing. It's a drop in the bucket, but we do have a model. There is a lot of scaling up that's required, a lot of capital that's required in order to kind of scale up, just simple vehicles and, like material reclamation facilities. I was doing a very quick calculation just to figure out that, the amount of fuel that we waste on transporting all of this waste that we could otherwise utilize, in a more local setting to these landfills. It's like billions and billions of dollars, and God knows how much fuel that we're importing, just so that we can take this outside the city premises. Cities are becoming big. You have to now take it long distances just to get, dispose of it. So I think, there are options over here. And I think sometimes everything happens for the best. I think, we do have this huge advantage of labor availability, but I definitely do feel like that labor has to be somehow formalized. It's not like, sometimes people say that, like you're, what do you want them to do? I mean, I want them to work, still do the same thing, just do it in a better conditions, under better, industry conditions, right? That's what we need to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Babar. You're absolutely on point here, because informal sector, if it's not regulated, that's also a challenge when we're talking about data. And there's conditions, socioeconomic conditions and everything will not be addressed unless and until we have certain, regulatory mechanism around informal sector. That's a huge challenge, but I believe UN system is working around it. We have ILO, we have UN Habitat. They're trying to work around it, but I believe again there's a little less alignment with the private sector when we're talking about UN system. So I am not criticizing anyone. Faraz is here from Living Indus Initiative, but this is something that we have observed. So before I request Bontu for her intervention, Faraz, from the Living Indus Initiative's perspective, you have heard the industry representatives, the recyclers. There are many great projects coming up to integrate plastics SMEs and how plastic waste can be managed. But what is your stance? How we can better integrate every stakeholder when we are talking about plastics and not hamper the overall agenda of Pakistan around plastics? Another important question, I'm clubbing the two questions. how Living Indus initiative intends to communicate the challenge of plastic with the consumers, because consumers are not much aware around the issue of plastics in Pakistan. And we are very much missing the consumers when we are talking about plastics treaty as well from Pakistan's perspective. Over to you.
Thanks again, Zainab. I'll take two questions separately, but the first one, with respect to plastics, with respect to I'll take the data context of it, because I think that that is still important in a certain way. First of all, the sheer magnitude of the problem is beyond comprehension, and not one person, as I have already mentioned, not one person or one organization can take up the challenge. So we need to identify and segregate two primary sources, like which data is actually the primary and which part of the data we can rely on crowdsourcing. So the crowdsourcing element has to be part of it in order to get us a picture which can be at the macro level. So that particular macro level at least gives us some starting point, because I believe that within Living Indus we tend to work on the same strategy, that at least there has to be a starting point. Like, we cannot actually sit and do nothing. Specifically with respect to the climate change challenges that we are facing, I think adaptation is our way forward. We cannot stop the overall trend, what's happening around the world. So I think in order to adapt, we need to have certain sense. And that sense will come from once we segregate the data, that which particular data is primary, can be used for strategy making, which particular part of the data is from crowdsourcing and can be used for the decision making, which probably not at the strategic level, but at least at the implementation level can solve our problems. So that's, I think, one particular context that we need to account for. The second part, as part of Living Indus, telling the Living Indus story is one of the key interventions, which actually aims at how Indus is impacting our lives. Because the things that we need to understand, and we normally repeat this thing time and again in various different conferences, that 90% of the Pakistan lives within Indus Basin. Like 10 top most populated cities, 9 out of them are within Indus Basin. So we need to consider how bigger the problem or the challenge that we are actually facing with. So as part of Living Indus, we definitely try to propagate the message. If Indus is given a personification, what Indus essentially would be telling to us, what essentially we have done to the Indus. And as it has been quoted earlier by Dr. Adil Najam in various different places, that Indus has supported the civilization for 5,000 years. Can it support the next 100? So if you consider this particular sentence, I think it tells you the crux, what necessarily needs to be done. And this needs to be propagated.
Thank you for us. Thank you for that. And yes, it has to be made personal when we are talking about how consumers should be made aware of it. It has to be made personal. Like, plastics is my problem and it must start at home. What I'm doing with plastics. So on to my next question is from you. And also, if you can share it in a way that we get a recommendation out of it. I know that's tough, but because being a development partner, it's important for your recommendation will be very much important for all the stakeholders sitting in this room, and also for the government as well. So what strategies or partnerships you think are essential for ensuring that private sector actions align with global treaty goals and foster sustainable long-term change across borders? Over to you, please.
Thank you, Zainab. It's a very, very difficult question to drive a recommendation out of. I'll do my best. Kind of seeing this topic area, which we understand is incredibly complex, and there are a number of different dependencies across the value chain to allow us to create an environment that is clean and one that is...
Sorry, Bantu, can you speak a little closer to the mic?
Yes. Is this better?
Yes, better than before.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I think, to answer this question, there are a number of different pathways and avenues in which we can foster long-term change through for instance, public-private partnerships similar to the Global Plastic Action Partnership, key strategies, both nationally, regionally, and also at the state level. I think it's incredibly important to incorporate state level and municipal level action on this. One of them is creating an enabling environment for these actors, especially private sector, to be able to be more responsible in terms of understanding where the end of life is with their products. And as Jody had mentioned, there are a lot of companies such as Nestle that are doing such amazing projects and actions on a voluntary manner. And we see this also in a lot of the developing countries that we work in, where, for instance, in Nigeria, there is this shared passion to ensure that the environment is clean and that plastic pollution isn't, deterring economic growth. But the issue there is that we don't see enough enforcement. So we'll see specific policies and bans be established with amazing intentions at heart by government, but then the companies that are following these regulations are not being rewarded for it. Meanwhile, other companies are continuing to violate them and are not really these policies are not being enforced. So it's really difficult, especially in a country that is growing, to encourage these types of activities. So I think first, enabling an environment that encourages these actors and enforces the policies that we have, discussed and spent a lot of time investing in. Second, developing national EPR frameworks, which is, adhering as well to understanding the different policy mechanisms that would support a clean environment. And through GPAP's work, this is one of our task forces, or one of our impact areas, which is policy. And we support countries in establishing EPR strategies. So it's it's a key recommendation there. But also having harmonization between key governments that are both multilateral, multinational governments and local governments, and understanding what the impact of a specific policy would look like. So it's incredibly important for this to be multi-stakeholder process. So I think platforms such as the NPAP are crucial for that. And third, I know we discussed data transparency and accountability is also incredibly important to understand the tracking of different plastic flows. This is a document that we had published a few years back, a landscape analysis for Pakistan, and soon we'll have a roadmap that analyzes this baseline analysis as well and gives key interventions that are recommended by the different stakeholders for the NPAP. But it's incredibly important to have accountability to understand which interventions will take which stakeholders, whether that be government, academia, civil society, private sector. So understanding where your value is and what your responsibility is in this collective effort is incredibly, it's crucial to achieve our shared goals. Something we found in our more mature partnerships is creating a progress tracking system of some sorts to see where are we going, what's the status of these different interventions, and meeting on a regular basis to ensure that the accountability for these actions are shared rather than dismissed to whether it be government or et cetera. I think that's something that we really have to take a shared effort to ensure that we're all in this effort together.
That's very helpful, Bontu. I mean, developing a progress tracking system, and I think if every company, every stakeholder develops that system, it's very easy to monitor the impact of their work and also to help them develop the future vision and mission plans for how they'll be proceeding with the challenges. Thank you for your interventions. I really want to open the floor for one or two questions, but just in one-liner. I'd request the panelists in one-liner, or maybe you want me to open the floor for questions. Okay, let's take one or two questions, and then I'd request the panelists to share in one line the key policy recommendation that they want us to share with the government of Pakistan, and especially in context of Global Plastics Treaty. Yes, any questions? The floor is open. If you have any questions from the participants. Plastics masla hal ho gaya hamara? Is it resolved? We don't have any questions, sir. So if you can use the mic, please. and also introduce yourself.
I'm a consultant in plastic waste management. My question is that in Pakistan, every province has their own regulation for the plastic. One province has got the Punjab, for example, have the minimum thickness of the plastic shopping bag 75 micron, whereas in the Sindh it is 30 micron. So for some item, there should be regulation that all the provinces should have the same width or regarding the plastic.
Okay, this is your suggestion, right?
Yeah.
So for the online panelists, what he's saying that in Punjab we have the size of plastic for that should be utilized in the plastic bag is 75 microns, and in Sindh it's 30 microns. So that's a challenge for the industry as well. If anybody from here would like to comment on it, but I think that's Vakar already mentioned that it's a challenge. It has to be consistent throughout the country, and that's why industry suffers when there's a new regulation that just pops up out of nowhere in one province, and in another province there's hardly any regulation. So yeah, that's a challenge, and thank you for pointing that out. Any other question or comments from the participants?
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I'm Anam, but I'm working for a Gaia International Private Limited. Basically, we are a company which is working to provide sustainable solutions to the world. My question is from Baba Saab. As we are also thinking to go into the recycling, we should set up a recycling plant in Islamabad. This is what 2 to 3 year goals. My question is for you. When I was searching a lot on this, don't you think there should be a formal structure should be provided by the government for the collection of the waste, or you can say the plastic or the single-use plastic, whatever you can say, because जो आपने बात की थी, it's the same thing. It's like being a private company, it's not a job to collect the waste basically. So don't you think they should, like a government should play its role in?
Yeah. Okay, so I would say it's completely should be completely the opposite, man. I would say that the government should get out of the waste collection business. I think that's what's more important, because whenever it's the same thing as PIA and whatever we're listening to these days, right? The problem is that the government doesn't have the incentive to do anything with that waste. They are getting money from the government and they just transport that waste into whatever little plot that they're guided towards. When a private company will go in and do the waste management, they will have that interest, the vested interest, to go and find as much material out there, keep it in a form which is going to be easily sellable, so that he can make some sort of money out of it. I think when Zainab was asking me about that one-liner that everyone would have, my one-liner would be that the government needs to somehow get out, or create some space for the private sector to come in. Right now there's absolutely no space. Like it's literally, I think, I don't need to go into too much details, but we all know how waste management contracts and all are done in Pakistan. I think what they need to do is get professional companies to come in, do waste management services, so that, the leakage happens during the collection. It doesn't happen, like, it doesn't just disappear out of my house. It disappears somewhere once it goes out of the house and then goes all towards the landfill. Now, we have to figure out a way how to stop and plug that gap. And I think private sector is probably the main player that has the ability to do that. Government for sure does not. And this is where that comment that I've been listening to for the longest time, that Zainab was alluding to before as well, that the waste is the property of the government. I'm sure everyone would be more than willing to give the government their waste, but that's not a solution. There is absolutely no solution. I think that's something which is very, 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 you're swimming against the current. When the government itself says that, okay, this is my responsibility, now that you have to kind of tiptoe around all of these things, try to figure out how to do that. And I think my suggestion would be the opposite. You don't necessarily as a recycler have to do that, but you do require good quality raw material. You just need someone to give that to you. And if you expect the government to do that, I think you'll be waiting a long time.
Thank you, Babar. So just last question, and then we have to wrap up, please. Yes.
Hello. I was very happy to see the Ataturk Avenue Road in a plastic road, the first plastic road in Pakistan, maybe. I don't know, it was in Lahore, but that was the second or third, I don't know. But it was a very amazing project. I was way, in awe of the project. But all of a sudden I heard that it just stopped. So does the road kind of, raise some emissions or something? So why did the project stop or the funded stop?
Yeah, no, I think it was just a tester that they did, just to kind of like, make people aware that there is a possibility of something like that to happen. And unfortunately, like road making is not a company, no private business does that. It has to be a government, who gives out these contracts. And I think it is definitely a very feasible project. And I think it'll be even more feasible than the one that they did. I think they've made a couple more roads in different cities. Different companies did that, and this one was done by Coca-Cola and amongst others. And what they've done is they've used more different materials. Coca-Cola used their own material. I think we need to go towards those materials which are like, we were mentioning, multi-layered. Why not use those? So I think that's where the future is. But I think government is the only one who can do, unfortunately, this part of the business. Only a government can do. And I think that has to be a will on their part. And there's no emissions like that. I know that there was this whole, a lot of like talk about microplastics coming out of the road while roads are, I don't think there's any solid evidence of that I've seen at least.
So thank you. The environmentalist in me couldn't stop herself. So there are challenges. I'm sorry. I don't endorse those roads at all. I believe scoping studies needs to be conducted before we come up with these kind of projects. They might sound very innovative, but if we are not aware of what's leaching down and contaminating the soil and groundwater, we can't say that's an amazing project. That's an environmentalist in me. Now coming back to the moderators, Zainab here. So just one recommendation, Waqar Saab, from your end, please.
I'll give two. So one, I think I'm just going to repeat myself, is on the harmonization of the regulations on it. I think that's very crucial for the country. And two, I think I'll just quote what Baba just said. I think it's important that we create some incentives for recyclers, for collectors and recyclers to enter into this area. That's very, very crucial. If we really want them to be managed efficiently, want our waste to be managed efficiently, then we need to create opportunity with the right policy measures. That I would say, I think is very crucial.
Thank you. Yes, Dr. Bassett.
So Zainab, as I mentioned earlier, so you need to understand the magnitude and also the nature of the problem that we're dealing with. What probably government also need to do is to allow the innovations to help achieve the circularity of plastics. We need to support the local industry, which is already in the recycling business. I'm not really sure that we have recognized the local industry as a proper industry as well. I mean, you see that's the issue. So we are not even sort of like recognizing the recyclers as a proper industry. So we need to really seriously think about those, what we say and what we do. So we need to support the industry which is already in the recycling. Plus, we need to support innovations that would be coming from, let's say, from academia, especially for the circularity of plastic. So we need to create a framework which support that innovation as well. Thank you very much.
Faraz, your intervention, please.
Thank you, Zainab. I think in a very small phrase, we need to integrate to adopt. That integration has to be towards the circular economy, starting from the initial product design, where actually it gets recycled. So that integration in the whole value chain needs to be there. Once that is at its place, I think that we'll be in a better position to comment or to have assess the impacts of that particular element. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Jody, your one-liner recommendation, please.
Sure. Treaty on a Page. We've developed a one-pager where we look at critical elements of a UN treaty, from plastic products and chemicals to sustainable production and consumption. I shared it in the chat, so you can all take a look at it after the event, but hope that recaps what we're looking for in the UN treaty.
Okay, IT team, chat ko display kar dijiye. What's your recommendation?
Our recommendation is that we follow a start, strengthen, and follow-up approach when it comes to the work on the UN treaty, so that all countries can work together, building the systems necessary to manage waste.
Thank you so much, Jody. Thank you so much, Bontu, for joining us online here and for sharing your interventions. I think this has been a very interesting and engaging panel. Thank you so much to the panelists here. Thank you, Core Alliance, for bringing this important debate here at this forum. And I can assure you that these recommendations will be sent directly to the Ministry of Climate Change. Plus, we are also hosting side events at COP29, where we'll definitely be sharing these stances and presenting the case of Pakistan there, and we'll make sure that the stance gets shared in its actual form, not distorted. So the recommendations have been compiled by the team, and they will be shared with all the stakeholders that are relevant. And SDPI, being not just a member of Core Alliance, but being a neutral think tank and policy think tank, will always advocate for policies that that is aligned with everyone's interests, but also because plastics climate change is a national agenda now. It's a development agenda. It has to be prioritized by every industry, by every sector. And because it is prioritized, that's why we all are sitting here discussing it with you. So thank you so much, academia, industry, private sector, UN system, all stakeholders are here except for the Ministry of Climate Change, but you can see their logo on the back. They're the ones who have collaborated for this forum. So they'll be definitely getting back to us, to all the stakeholders with, on the response on the recommendations. Thank you to all of you for joining us. The session was live on the social media, and tonight the key recommendations will also be shared on our social media platforms. Thank you. Enjoy the conference. We have our next session at 5:30 p.m. and that session is a very important session. That's a session is Nestle's session on agriculture and how climate agenda is shaping the agriculture. So do join us in the main auditorium downstairs. As of now, a live fireside chat session is being displayed on the SMD. That's with Lisa Gans. She's speaking on inclusive climate investment. You can see that. Plus the food court, do go enjoy yourselves, enjoy the delicious food. We are promoting local food brands. Go and promote them, enjoy dosas, enjoy chaat, and please feel free to join us. I request my participants, the panelists here, the panel organizers, to please join us for a group photo. Thank you so much. And also Bontu and Jody, if you can stay online so we can have you in the picture as well. Jody's gone. Okay. Thank you. Okay, then in-person participants, if you can join us, we can club the pictures together later on.